and welcome back to another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast. Today, you've heard me do in the past a few solo episodes, but today I am thrilled because I get to welcome my partner in crime, the man, the myth, the legend, Jay Shorr, my dad. And we are actually recording this on video while we are recording this podcast episode. So you all have heard me talk about Jay again and again. If you missed our solo one-on-one heart-to-heart episode about how we got started in Shorr Solutions, go back and listen. It was the very first episode. But today I am welcoming my pops to the podcast. Say, hey, Dad.
Hello, hello, hello.
We are going to be talking today about something that every single practice deals with, and that is employee theft inside your practice. Now, for the sake of today's conversation, we're obviously going to be talking about the cosmetic aesthetic industry and theft inside your practice. And if you have heard lectures from Jay any other time of the any other time in conference history, then you'll know this is something that he is an expert at as far as giving tips and tricks, looking at how to prevent theft, how to spot theft, and what to do if you found it. So we are going to talk about that today. And Jay, you ready to get started?
I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
Okay. So Jay, let's start with the fact that 82% of medical practices report theft in their office. So let's get started with that statistic alone. That's a big statistic. And what kind of theft are we talking about? Let's kick off the conversation with that.
Well, you see me smile, but it's not funny. In all honesty, there's so many different types of theft and fraud, and I consider fraud to be theft. I consider embezzlement to be theft. Anything where somebody decides that they want to be a partner without
quote unquote
signing,
partner.
without signing like a formalized partnership agreement in the legal sense of the word, to me is theft. And there are many different types of theft. For example, I've seen situations, even unfortunately in my own former practice, where patients had their valuables in the exam room, and while they were having a laser treatment performed, they had the shutter goggles, the dark goggles, and an unscrupulous medical assistant pilfered through the purse that may have been on a chair on the floor because the doctor also had goggles on. And unbeknown, the medical assistant took off their goggles and then pilfered it, through the purse. And of course, the patient didn't know it till it came time to pay. That's one time. Collected receipts from patients. This goes at the checkout process, where you may end up going in and checking out through your practice management software. And then when the receptionist, director of first impression, checkout person has the opportunity, they go in and they delete the transaction that's been posted. So what happens is the patient physically gets a receipt for the transaction. The person in your office goes in, deletes the actual transaction. And this happens especially when it's a cash transaction, because it's very hard to do if it's a credit card transaction, because if it was processed, or if you have this scanning of checks, once that check has been scanned, it's very difficult not, to process it anymore.
And when you say cash, Jay, you mean actual show me the Benjamins
the
cash.
The old green paper that we used to use pre-pandemic that used to have like a lot of presidents' faces on it.
Yes. So we're not talking cash versus insurance. We're talking actual dollar bills. Right.
Yeah. And It's funny because people, I don't know the last time I've actually used cash, and it's like, keep the change, it's like, so that's collected receipts from patients. And what I say, the solution to that is really to create and have a deletion report, similar to that of EMR and medical records. There always is a trace. So produce a deleted report and see what is deleted, because there are many legitimate reasons to have a deleted transactions. For example, I have two Mara Shorrs, let's say, and one is Maura, or it's Mara, Mara, and it's Shorr, Shor, Shore, Shorr, and it might be, and especially in certain communities where you may have a heavy Latino base and a heavy Jewish base where they have a lot of common names.
How many Morris Cohens did you have in your practice
Yeah,
before,
we had a lot of
Jay?
Morris and Minis, and we had Rodriguez's and Lopez's.
Right.
But seriously, what happens, I even make that mistake in my own address book when I'm sending an email. I hit MA and hit enter, and I send it to Mary somebody when I really meant to send it to Mara. So this can really happen. So there are reasons why you physically delete a transaction and then repost it. But this is just something you have to be careful about in deletions of transactions. And just go back and look at a deletion report and review it. Now, office and medical supplies. Um, this is true theft as well, because I used to have a time where in August and September, I would tell my staff, each one of you, because I knew, and each one of you has an allotment of 2 legal tablets, a box of pencils, a half a dozen pens. Take them home to your kids for school supplies. It was a gift because we had a lot of um, um, single moms. We had a lot of married moms and couples, but it was a way for us to actually kind of like give a bonus to people for school supplies. And what that did is actually it prevented theft because people end up taking school supplies, office supplies unknowingly. My whole drawer is filled with pens. They didn't actually steal them. I got them from conferences. But you know the deal. You go in somewhere, but not now. I go into places now, if I go into places, and I bring my own pen.
Right. Words of Aladdin. It's a whole new world at this point. So I think, maybe school supplies are down a little bit as far as theft is concerned. But
For now,
for now, for the moment, what about skincare products though? Because
well, this
that's
was a big
still
one. This was a real big one. I either had to worry about it from patients or even potentially staff. But in ours, we did not have an open display of skincare products. All
let's
right,
talk
our
about why.
open because you don't want people looking at it and putting it in their purse. What we did have as an open display were boxes with nothing in them. All right, or boxes with empty tubes. All right, so, because a lot of the things, even me included, when I go to purchase something, I have an uncanny sense of smell, and a lot of scents are very offensive to me. All right. So, even more than efficacious effect, if I don't like the smell of a product, no matter how good it is, I won't purchase it. So the one thing I like to do is smell it. And if you have an empty container, you can also smell it from what it was. Similar to that, it even kind of like antiperspirant and deodorants. You don't have to take the seal off. You can just smell it. So I had a separate area where I had the majority of my inventory, but there's cases and clients that we have, Mara, as you well know, that people take some of the major brand product, empty it out, and fill the product. You can peel the cap off and peel it back with the generic product. And I hate to say that it happens. It happens. And, the classic story that, you and I always tell is we were in a physician's office, plastic surgeon's office, and we uncovered a theft.
Mhm.
And we told the doctor at dinner that night on a site visit about the theft. And he says, well, I make enough money, I can't start tracking all that, or I can't do without that employee. And what that employee was doing, and I'll give you the example of what it was, they were consumable thermage tips. And I'm not here to speak about one brand or another.
Right.
Fraxel tips, thermage tips, cycles, clicks, whatever you want to call it,
Something with consumables, a
a
device with
consumable.
consumables. Sure.
And he was a PA for another practice. And what he was doing was telling the other's practice to pay him by the procedure plus the consumable, of which he was stealing. And it's the old trick of the vodka bottle that the teenagers used, and empty out the vodka and then refill it with water. And I've had that happen with Botox, a little bit for me, a little bit for you, and extract the pure of Botox mixed at 1 cc of saline and replace it with more saline. So you're getting real purified, real good neuromodulator, Xeomin, Dysport, Botox. I'm not going to be partial to any one of them, even though I am. But for the sake of this, and this is what happens, whether it's a skincare product, back bar,
Now, Jay,
back bar.
hold on real quick though. When you're talking about the old water in the vodka bottle, right? And I was a good kid. I didn't pull this, but believe me, I know people that did. How did you find out? How did the practice find out that this was going on? Because I want you to tell that story about how you found out, how you dealt with it as a
Well,
practice
there were
as
two
well.
ways. Two ways. The first way I found out is I kept getting a lot of less responders and non-responders. And I knew that when we mixed our neuromodulator, with 2.5 cc's of saline, that each tenth was 4 units. All right. I mean, that's simple math. 3 is 3.3, 2 is 5, 1 is, 1 is 10. All right. When you're doing the deconcentration level. And when you do the same amount of units in the crow and the glabella and the frontalis, and these are the same patients that kept coming back, you kind of know how many units you have put in the anatomy, in the face. And when they kept coming back, and these are the days we never charged by the unit, we charged by the area. All right. With free touch-ups.
Right.
So when the same Mara patient would come back for their 2-week follow-up, and we did that for multiple reasons, which we could speak of another reason, we kept seeing that they were less responsive into the upper brow or in certain areas of the frontalis that never had before, because when they came back prior for their 2-week follow-up, we took photos and we didn't see the movement that we kept seeing.
So this is another good reason, not to interrupt, but this is another really good reason that you should have them back every 2, not every 2 weeks, but have them back in 2 weeks with every treatment, and B, take before and after photos. This is another really good case for why every single patient needs before and after photos. But I digress. Keep on going, Jay.
Yeah, and this became more of a problem. And what I was noticing is we were a very large purchaser of the neuromodulator product. So if we would buy 25 bottles in a week or every 2 weeks, every one of you out there will know that if you buy 5 bottles, 10 bottles, 20 bottles, 50 bottles at one time, they're usually, if not all, going to come in the same lot number. But if you order 10 bottles, 25 bottles today, and 25 bottles tomorrow, they're probably not going to be the same lot number because of the hundreds of thousands of bottles that are distributed by the manufacturer in the course of a day. They're going to come in with different lot numbers. And this is the days before EMR. And then with the inception of EMR, I would track the lot numbers that were the non-responders. And at one point in time, they were all the same. So I called the manufacturer and they said, send us a bottle, of the product. Well, it's not hard to do because I used to save our 5, 10 bottles a day or 2 days, because as we all know, at the end, you take all your bottles, you pop the tops, you extract the amount that's left in the bottle, and you can get a good amount of Botox, Dysport, Xeomin on the bottom of the bottle. So I always had a little bit left. So I took, those bottles and I sent them back to the manufacturer. And of course, naturally, the question was, what is your dilution rate? And I told them, and they said, that's not what this dilution rate is. And I was shocked to understand this. So what I ended up doing was diluting it myself and sending that bottle full with 100 units back to the manufacturer, because it's not as if it was the bottom of the barrel. It was a full bottle because I wanted to find out what was the dilution rate of a full bottle.
You had a busy practice. So how did you, or how does one uncover which team member has done the dirty, and how do you handle the situation once you discover that? Because we've run into all sorts of situations where we will go into a practice and on a site visit, and we see all sorts of things being stolen. And now I'm talking about all sorts of product being stolen. I'm not talking about theft of prescription pads. I'm not talking about that, which is a separate conversation. But I'm also not talking here about the drugs that are used to sedate patients, the drugs that are used to put the patients to sleep. I'm talking about a syringe of this, a syringe of that. We've seen this happen. And, I want to keep the syringe ready in my coat pocket. I don't want an MA to do it. I'm more efficient when I mix it myself. So
you just uncovered one of two of the major ways that I did it. I was the keeper of the product. So if they were syringes, every bottle is numbered, mm-hmm. and every syringe is numbered. And I had a inventory list of every bottle and who it was injected, every bottle of the neuromodulator by the unit 10th or whatever, and who it was injected into. And I did this for multiple reasons. I did it for inventory reasons, and I did it in, God forbid, in the event of a recall, which we've never had actually. I always knew what patients were injected with that lot number. All right, because that went on to the paper intake sheet. It then went on to the EMR treatment, sheet. Also with the filler, every box was numbered. On the Allergan products, they were numbered box 1A, B, 2A, B. On the Galderma products, they were numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The reason is because the Allergan products had 2 syringes per box versus the Galderma
and did
product.
you manually number them? You're saying you
I
manually numbered them.
I numbered them when I ordered them on a log sheet. I numbered them on the receiving sheet, the packing list, and then I physically, with a Sharpie, would number the side and the front of the box. And I would keep them in a locked closet in my office, except for maybe 10 boxes of the syringes of each product and maybe 10 bottles of the neuromodulator in the refrigerator at that time.
We've also suggested to our clients before that they need a small fridge with a lock on it, and that is also, an alternative for your product that does need to be kept refrigerated.
Except for Xeomin. Xeomin does not have to be refrigerated.
Right.
All right.
Exactly.
And these are the days when you actually had to keep it frozen. All right. Before it came that you had to keep it refrigerated. And then when Xeomin came out, you didn't have to keep it. But I still kept them in a closet that was locked. My refrigerator had a lock on it as well. Now, I then uncovered a different way. I had a suspicion of who my unscrupulous employee was. And I only gave that employee a specific lot number. And I gave other doctors different lot numbers. So that when I had non-responders and lower responders, I could limit it down to a specific lot number, because only specific providers, each provider, I had 3 PAs, NPs, and I had 3 doctors. So each one had their own lot numbers, because I wasn't sure who my unscrupulous employee was. What I did know is it wasn't the owner of the practice.
Right.
That I knew. All right.
Sure.
I had a medical assistant who came to me, and she was a high school student ready to go into PA school. And she said to me, I think there's a problem. And when a younger, look, I applaud this. When a younger 21-year-old medical assistant comes to me and says, I think I have a problem, I'm thinking, do you know enough to uncover a problem? But you understand how many years ago this was, that if a 18, 21-year-old young man or woman comes to me today, I'm much more apt to listen because of technology than I was back then. And said, I think we have a problem because this PA always has a syringe in her pocket, as you just mentioned, in her lab coat, and does not allow anybody to mix the product but her. And I became very, very suspicious. And I thought, I called the PA out. And I said, you're not allowed to do this. Well, but it helps me. And this one says, and I also don't need a medical assistant working with me. And we were a very busy practice. So we had several medical assistants per provider because you're running from room to room to room. We had 12 exam rooms. And, you could have one provider every 15 minutes going to several different exam rooms. You diagnose the problem, you mark the patient, you say what you want, the medical assistant gets the patient ready, the doctor, PA, NP comes back.
Right.
All right. Now, in non-busy practice, this is not an issue, but I said every provider had to have an MA for scribing, for charting, so that it could be more efficient. And then when the provider moves on, I had that MA. And then I also had what we called roomers, ROOMERS, that would clean the exam room up, go to the reception area, relaxation room, waiting room, whatever that is, to bring the patient back to the room and speak to the patient so the patients didn't have to sit in a room alone in that hateful 15 minutes to a half hour in a gown or whatever, waiting for the provider. It's
the
wait
napkin on your lap, essentially. Yes.
So that, we always had somebody in a room with the patient. So that was, one of the things. Then we move on to prescription pads.
Now, so when we're moving on to prescription pads, this is something that can either be done. So it used to be that there was an actual prescription pad, and sometimes there still is a piece of paper. There is what we're finding more and more often, and we've actually had several situations we've had to address this within the past 2 years. We'll leave it at that time period so that we don't out anybody anywhere. So we'll say within 2 years, but we've had several situations where a client has had, or a practice that we connect with comes to us and say, I have had one of my team members, or I've even had a colleague log in under my system, and they're prescribing to themselves, they're prescribing to a family member, they're e-scribing it, and they are not legally, number one, not legally able to do that because they are not able to legally prescribe medication.
Not narcotics.
Oh no, I mean, this could be somebody that is not even a provider,
right.
But it could also be that you can't prescribe a medication, that medication under somebody else's name, especially without their consent. And we've seen this happening. We've seen this happening more and more. We're in the midst now of a pandemic. Stress levels are high. Doctors are able to prescribe different drugs that can maybe take the edge off if you're feeling overworked or overrun or whatever that is. 2 questions then for you that I'd love for you to focus in on is, how does one find out that this is happening in their practice? If you maybe are prescribing a lot because you do a lot of surgery, and so there could be a lot of, prescriptions of just one of this, one of that, et cetera. What do you look for in your practice to see if this is happening? And then what do you do next once you realize that this has happened?
There's so many preventative measures or telltale signs. Now, there are prescriptions that can be numerical sequenced. All right. And whether you have singular or duplicate prescriptions, this is the days of paper chart. Now, look, not every practice has EMR. I'm not suggesting, that's another lecture. Okay.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. We're not going to get into paper.
I'm going to give you 2 examples of prescription pad, prescription theft.
Okay.
One client calls us and says, I got a call from a pharmacy that one of my employees called in a narcotic drug and the diagnosis didn't match the drug prescribed. The doctor says, first of all, who was the patient? When the physician realized it was an employee, and was a licensed employee, I don't know if their first call was to us or to the employee, all right? But I think it was to us to find out what should I do and what should you handle?
Yeah.
And I said, you can't sweep this under the carpet, because now you have bigger problems than just the theft of calling in the prescription in their name. Now you may potentially have an employee under the influence of an intoxicating or narcotic drug that will not get better. It's only going to get worse. And heaven forbid, this is an OR nurse. With that being said, you've got to terminate the employee immediately. All right. Reject the prescription. Now, under criminal prosecution, I think sometimes, whether you call the board of nursing, there may be a matter of ethics. I would never suggest giving a good reference to the next employer, prospective employer. I wouldn't give the exact incident, but there are ways to negate a good reference by, yes, Mara worked here. Well, would you rehire her? Yes, Mara worked here. And as you say it, because we do a lot of references when we're hiring for our clients, you get the telltale when somebody doesn't give you, I wish he or she would come back. I would hire them back in a minute. All right. I uncovered it because another way was we have a client in California, and they have a pharmacy downstairs from their office, and the pharmacy calls the doctor and said that, it is unlikely for you to be prescribing these high doses of testosterone, because this doctor has never prescribed testosterone that has been filled by the pharmacy downstairs, in a medical center. And the doctor says, well, who is it? And it happened to have been another doctor on the floor, not in his office, but a colleague down the hall where he rents. The client says to me, what do I do? I said, you reject the prescription, naturally, but you need to call that doctor and have a one-on-one, eyeball-to-eyeball visit and say that this is intolerable. First of all, how could you ever put me in this situation? As it is, the doctor very shortly, soon thereafter, went out of business and moved out of the building and is nowhere to be found. That I don't know. There could be many reasons why that is. And I'm not suspecting or surmising anything other than follow the trail and it will give you a lot. So, doctors can get reports from drug manufacturers of what they prescribe. Now, patient and employee access can be restricted to giving e-scribe, all right? And now, many years ago, Florida adopted, and now I know California has it, many states have it now, that you cannot do a paper prescription on a regular prescription pad for different types of drugs, scheduled drugs, narcotics, and things like that. And what was happening is, I've always suggested that the doctor keep prescription pads in their pocket and the supply is kept in a locked cabinet. Now, these were the days before pharma said, no, we're not, pharma used to give out free prescription pads. Every 5th or 10th prescription, there was an ad from a drug company, all right? And of course, you would get your prescription pads for free. You can't do that anymore because pharma said no. Then what happened is prescription pads were all over. They were in every room or whatever. So then when we started locking them up, and Florida had specific type, they were printed by certain approved vendors and they had different encryptions on them and watermarks on them. But what ended up happening for type of prescribed type of narcotic drugs like tretinoins and triamcinolones and betamethasone types of drugs, the vendors would provide you with prescription pads, and they would have your name printed on it and would have the name of the drug and the dosage on there. And it was pre-printed. And it's okay because no one's going to get high from triamcinolone or betamethasone. Okay. But what ended up happening is there's always a thicker, slicker tool in the shed. They would take those prescriptions, they would put them on a photocopy machine, and they would cover up what was already printed on there. Okay. And then they would write their own prescription on there. Now, I am not a doctor. However, I can write a prescription like a doctor, SIG with the colon and the sign and everything on there, and and how many number, milligrams, QID, TID, QHS, PRM, whatever it is you want to say. And then somebody that's worked for a doctor for a long time knows their signature.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And so I always said, keep your prescription pads out. Now,
what do you mean keep your prescription pads out?
Out of sight.
Out of sight, right. So we don't mean keep them on your desk. We mean keep them out of sight.
No, locked up, and only keep the ones in and have a trusted person in your office, like your manager or your administrator. Now, if your administrator or your manager is the thief, that creates another problem. I mean, you have to somebody you trust, all right? And I'm not saying it can't happen. It can, and it will.
I remember we were at, I think it was AAF PRS maybe 2 years ago in Chicago, and Dr. Steve Diane stood on stage and he said, if you haven't been stolen from yet, you just haven't been in practice long enough. It happens to everybody, whether it is something as big as the prescription issue that we're talking about, whether it is something about, an extra SPF goes in my purse because I'm out, so I'm going to do that. So, I mean, we're talking everything from, the paper and pencil hoarder to the person that's writing themselves drugs. And I know one last thing, Jay, before we move on to the next type of theft, is that in your former practice, when a patient would come essentially looking for medication. And so your practice was known for, you would prescribe, one Ativan or one, prior to a procedure that they didn't get 7 days worth. They didn't get 10 days worth. They literally got one pill.
Now, this was the days before limits of how much narcotics a 3-day supply or whatever it is, 5-day supply, then went to 3-day supply. We would give it for pre-procedure. All right. Or even post-procedure, you would give the prescription that somebody has to drive you in. You can't drive yourself home, whether it was one Valium or one Vicodin or something like that, outside of surgery. If you had a breast augmentation, you had a tummy tuck or something like that, you would get a normal dose of whatever the surgeon prescribed. All right. And I'm not here to say what that prescription dosage should be. I'm not going to say I'm ill qualified, but I am unlicensed to give that advice, nor shall I. Okay. Right. So we had a level 3 triple AHC surgery center, and we had drugs that were in a triple lock cabinet. You needed a lock to get into the first drawer, then a combination to get into the second drawer, and then a lock key to get into the third drawer. All right, which is where the ketamine was, the Demerol was, the major drugs that will physically, the ampules, the bottles that will put you to sleep. And then, of course, there are those drugs that were in the red, our locked anesthesia cabinet. They were different than the ones that were actually kept in our narcotics cabinet. And then, of course, you had to have a log. So you have to be very, very careful of who has access. And the only one that had access to that triple locked narcotic cabinet was me and the medical director and the OR nurse. Nobody else, because no 3 of us could be out at the same time. Right? That was the rule. And we had a pharmacy consultant that would come in every 3 months and do an audit of our narcs logs. And there's different types. There's narcs logs that are ones that are used when they're entered the day of the surgeries and each dosage. And then there's the narcs log that every time you get an order, all right, the days of the DEA 222, when it was all done on paper and everything like that. And when it's received, you know, you have to enter it onto the log and do as an ad. I mean, and you got to be very careful about theft. And I want to share a story of what happened to me one time. Is I had ordered a bottle of 100 oxycodone, which is Percocet, all right? And they were 10 325s, different than the hydrocodone, which is the Vicodin. And it comes delivered, you do it on a DEA 222, and it's the 3-part series. You keep one, you send two, it comes back, you know, those old days. And the order came in, and when any UPS, FedEx order would come into our office, every order, I don't care if it was drugs or pencils, it had to be logged of who received it and where it was put so that we always could track a package. The package came in, it was in a plain white envelope so that nobody would know what it was. Except if you shake the bag, you'll know it could have been vitamins. You know, we would sell skincare and pills and things like that. You know, we had hormone therapy that were in pills. I put it in the OR nurse's office, locked the office, and when I came back, the OR nurse calls me and says, okay, where'd you put the pills? Where'd you put the Percocet? Because I used to play tricks with people. I would hide gauze and I would hide things in the OR in my hand when you're ready to do the recount, just to see if you did the recount correctly and to make sure that we're not missing needles and blades and lap sponges and things like that. And she says,
Right.
okay, where'd you put the pills? I said, what are you talking about? They said, yeah, you told me that the Percocet was on my desk. And I said, I didn't do that. And then, come on. I said, no, I really didn't do that. I ended up hiring a lie detector expert and put 7 people through that were in the office at that time. And it came back 5 were cleared and 2 were inconsistent. It could not uncover who actually did it. One person quit. They refused to take a test because it is their legal right. All right. I couldn't pin it because I didn't have cameras. It would never be able to get away with that today because I had later had 15 cameras in the office that no matter wherever you were, except your toilet, the exam room, you
Right.
were on, or anywhere that you would be unclothed, okay, you were on camera for those purposes. So you've got to be very, very careful. And true to fact is, I never found out who did it, but I did have to report it to the DEA. And I did make a report with the local sheriff's department because we were covered in an unincorporated part of the county here. So I had to report it to the sheriff.
So this brings up actually a really good point, Jay. So then when there is a theft, and again, I'm not talking about, 10 reams of paper or 5 reams of paper and some pens, but I'm talking about when there's prescription theft. Once you uncover who the thief is, what are the steps legally that the practice needs to take to make sure that they're reporting, that they're not missing any of the steps, and who needs to be reported to and what needs to be done? So if they uncover a thief, who do they have to report this theft to?
If you want to be covered legally, I would always make a report to your local police department. All right. I wanted to track because if there's ever an audit by the DEA, if you're going to report it to the DEA, now I'm not there to uncover who the thief was. I'm only there to report that there is missing. Now, I'm not talking about the anesthesiologist or the doctor that uses X amount of product in the OR and then wastes the balance, all right, and accounts for it on the narcotic log that it was waste, All right. Because if you drew it up in a syringe and you injected it, then you're not saving it for the next patient. You're going to draw up a new ampule or whatever. The legal things I'm going to leave for an attorney because I am also unlicensed to speak on the legal aspect. I will share with you many things that I am experienced to give advice on what I've done. I'm not licensed to give medical advice and I'm not licensed to give legal advice. However,
Right.
I would report it to a local authority so that there is a record. And I also would report it depending upon the quantity to the DEA if it was a DEA prescribed drug that I had to record for it that I'm using for internal use so that if I'm ever audited, what happened to 100 pills? I could account for 1 or 2 pills that fell on the floor. I don't know where they were. And maybe the cleaning people swept it up when they did my daily cleaning. Now, I'm not professing out there, people, that you should do that.
Mhm.
I'm just giving you a rhetoric answer that I could account for 1 or 2 that I don't know where they are.
Right.
And the DEA is not going to come and open an investigation for 1 or 2 missing pills. 100? A full bottle
Right.
that was ordered and actually never recorded on your intake?
And one of the things that I want to touch on as we're talking about this, and I know you and I wanted to hit on this, whether it was now, whether it was a little bit further into the conversation, but motives as far as what it is that makes that team member feel that they have the right to do this. Yes.
Who steals? Um, Providers performing procedures on the side. And it could be partners. Now, I'll share with you an instance that happened is somebody brought on a colleague and a partner, and they brought on a partner who had patients from their previous practice. And they were collecting revenue outside of the traditional checkout where they were claiming the revenue from the patient. And they were saying, but this was booked prior to me joining you, and this is just the recurrence of that revenue. I am usually when I bring somebody in as a partner in that contract, when we make contracts for our clients, I say that's out of line. And all revenue that's associated with that the day you join us now becomes our revenue collectively, of which you will get credited towards your production. But there is no sidebar that was part of the other revenue. Unless I am the person joining you, and that revenue may have been associated with prior production in the past. I might buy it as the associate joining, but I'm not buying it for you, the associate joining me.
Right.
Okay?
Right. And we've also seen at various provider levels, but they're essentially what we talked about before, whether it's your partner, a mid-level practitioner, an esthetician, not just vendors making deals with your managers, administrators on the side. But we always say that vendor communication, any special somethings, right? Extra bonuses, skincare, free product, etc., needs to come directly through the practice. So that doesn't go to your PA because they're the one that typically injects. That doesn't go to your esthetician because they recommend the majority of the skincare. All of the free, we use this in quote unquote free product, bonus product, needs to come through practice ownership because you're the one that's spending the money to purchase the product, to get the free product, the sample product, the trial. So that is, if they're collecting all of that, that's also another form of theft. And we've seen again and again any of the tricks from cash payments in the exam room. So if the provider says, if you just pay me cash, then we could take care of it right then and there. Which is why another reason we don't recommend checking your patients out in the treatment room. There's just a little too much privacy there, if you will. So that it should be done at reception/checkout. We've talked about and seen theft of materials to deliver outside, really delivering this outside business hours, right? So it's, oh, I can come to your house inject you for your filler. I'll do it on Saturday morning. So it's a special service we offer to our VIPs. And then you go, you look, it wasn't charted, it wasn't paid for through the business. It was essentially done with your product, right? The practice's product. And they're running a side business with your supply.
And then the patient calls and says, I have a problem with my treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I was bruised. I didn't get a result. And I've had this happen. And I say, when were you treated? And I look and there's nothing on the record. And they say, well, no, your esthetician, your PA came to my home and told me they were doing it for your practice. All right. Now, I don't buy it. I think the recipient of theft knows when that happens, when it's an anomaly outside of the regular practice. But I want to step back for a second, because the mid-level practitioners, estheticians, and for the sake of this conversation, I want to define a mid-level practitioner is anyone that's not a physician. I know that nurse practitioners and PAs may be insulted by the term mid-level practitioner. I didn't make the term up, okay? But if you are a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, or an esthetician, and you are getting those products, and this is where it happens the most. Skincare products go to estheticians because they're the ones ordering it. But you made a very important comment, Mara. They're not the ones paying for it. All right. And therefore, the receipt and recipient of the free product or training vial, if you will, all right, needs to go to the people who are paying it, and let the owner of the practice determine who that is, because now the nurse practitioner or the PA says, I want my treatment for free and I want this product for free. Well, what about the other 5, 10, 15, 20 employees, staff members you have that are equally as important to your practice? I kind of like refer to the military. Is the enlisted soldier any less important than the officer on the front line? And my answer is no, because each and every person, human resource, is as important as next, because you can't take parts out of a machine and expect the machine to operate properly. All right. Just because you have an engine and transmission with no wheels doesn't mean your car's going to run. All right. So then we come back to what you're saying is treating people after hours and discounting services. Because, you know, if you charge me $50 or $75 less, I'll give you a $25 tip. Well, that's a win-win for the client/patient.
But not a win for the practice.
And it's a loss for the practice.
Right.
All right. They copy your patient list. They treat patients at home, like you said. And then we're going to get into the motives. Now, I'm going to give you another example of something that I uncovered several years back. The employee didn't think that there was any theft behind it because they felt that the practice was made whole. For every cash transaction that was done, the employee, the front desk person, went in and changed the method of payment from cash to credit card, took the cash, put it in their pocket, and replaced the form of payment with their personal credit card. Now, at the end of the day, the gross dollars of amount collected is net identical, because I replaced $1,000 of cash with $1,000 worth of credit card payment. Now, what ends up happening? The practice is being stolen from at 1.5% to 2.5% on the merchant processing side.
Exactly.
And why did the employee do it? Two major reasons. One, I'm getting points on my credit card. And number two, depending upon the day of the month tied to their personal statement, They could get anywhere between a 30 and a 60-day free loan on the money that they took and replaced it with their credit card. Now, what do I mean by 30 to 60? If they did it close to their statement date, they would get the statement. They had 30 days to pay it. If they did it the day after their statement date, then they wouldn't get the invoice from their credit card company for 30 days, and then they had 30 days to pay that. Well, think about that. Getting thousands of dollars of an interest-free loan, I want to put my money at the Bank of Mara, all right, to get free money.
So, Jay, let's talk about motive. You just described one or two of the motives, but we also, when we look at motives, it could be when we talk about prescribing to oneself, it could be a drug addiction. There could be gambling addiction there when we're talking about theft in terms of money. There could be some financial issues going on when we're looking at, is there an ill child, an ill family member, foreclosure even. And Jay, you have a saying about perception of the quote unquote rich doctor. And you always talk about how the team members often they see the money coming in. And so they're the ones that are checking patients out. And so they see $500, $10,000, $1,000, $1,200, whatever that amount may be. And they see all of these digits coming in, but what they don't see is they don't see med school loan payments. They don't see how much rent costs every month. They don't see what the monthly payments are on that $100,000 to $200,000 piece of capital equipment, or what the vendor's bill looks like every month when you're purchasing that much of an injectable. And so you always refer to it as the rich doctor syndrome. If somebody is angry, if somebody is jealous, why does this doctor have this lifestyle and I don't have this amount of money, I don't have this car? So I think often it's, they feel underpaid and that the rich owner makes all the money.
There are some practices that don't properly compensate their staff. And look, I'm not here to say at what level is $5 not a lot of money, or is $5 a lot of money? Thank goodness, I, at 66 years old, I am a person of means at this point in my life, but have not always been for many, many, many years of my life. I had children. I had education. I had vehicles, homes. I had to support a family, and that was my number one priority. But understand something, that $5 is a lot of money to me. All right. And yet $5 is a piece of change to me. Mm-hmm. All right. And, crumbs and a loaf of bread is a lot of food to a starving human. And therefore, I always use this expression. People said to me, well, Jay, when is enough, for people? And I said, well, let me ask you a question. If you were somewhere and there was nobody within blocks or a mile of you, and you saw a $5 bill in the street, would you pick it up? Answer is, of course I'd pick it up. Well, why? Is $5 a lot of money to you? Yes, $1 is a lot of money to me. Mara, you and I have a big joke about finding a penny, nickel, or a dime in an airport. All right. If we see any change, well, I don't know about anymore, because I'm not picking anything up in an airport. I'm not even going to an airport.
Yeah, that inside joke was so 2019, Jay. Come on, that was so 2019.
But the joke was that if you found a change on the floor, it meant your flight was going to be on time. Mm-hmm. Now, I know this has nothing to do with this lecture or this podcast. However, it was always a joke. We would take a picture.
It became a superstition. Yeah.
We would take a picture of a nickel on the floor, and then our flight was going to be on time. So the motives are, they may be jealous of the physician's expensive lifestyle, and they may be angry or jealous of you because, as you said, Mara, they see hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars coming in and they're only being paid 15, 10, 15, $20 an hour, or 50,000, $100,000. A mid-level or a PANP may only being paid, and I say only, $100,000, $150,000, and they're generating $500,000. This is for another lecture of what should somebody be paid for the revenue that they
Right.
generate. However, you know what? People are always going to be jealous of other people. And I wish that would go away. I'm always happy to see people succeed. It makes me feel good when I see another colleague, my competitor, my collaborator that is doing well, because I don't want to see them. But,
Right.
you know, they may want to hurt you or damage your income because they feel that you're making all the money, you're that rich doctor, and you brought up a very good point. They never see your gross, they only see dollar, DOLLA
The dollar
apostrophe,
bills.
coming in, and they never see what that those expenses are. In many cases, nor should they, Mara. All right, except
Right. We're
depending
not,
upon the
yeah.
level that they play in the practice, they shouldn't know what that number is, because then they can additionally try to extort you. All right.
And one thing that we always want to make really, really clear is that it's the expression of monkey see, monkey do. And what you want to make sure is that you, as an owner, you as a manager, are setting the best example possible. So if you are an owner that intentionally steals cash out of the business, they know that you're taking the cash from the till at the end of the day, you're putting it in your pocket, you're walking out, that you go up and you say, I'm going to need 10 SBFs to give to my daughter's friends as they're going away to college. And they're seeing one example after another. Now, as an owner, there are certain luxuries you're afforded. There are certain ways that you obviously do still need to pay taxes on income and all of that good stuff. That's a whole separate conversation. But if your team sees that you are either accepting theft, like the example we gave of, oh, but this person, makes me a lot of money, and so I'm okay with it if they just steal the consumables. If they see that you're accepting it, or they see that you're doing it yourself, they are going to be much more likely to steal from your practice as well, because they believe, well, this is how the owner treats it. Just like stealing time. And if they see that the owner continuously comes in late, leaves early, because the owner is perceived to not really care how the business is run, even though as an owner, that is partially your right, but that is what they're going to do. So you want to make sure you're always leading by example and making sure that that is a top goal. Now, Jay, so
Well, you hit on something that is so important. Monkey see, monkey do.
mhm.
Um, if somebody sees you stealing and you're a ripoff and you're diluting the neuromodulators, or you are charging a patient for more units than you're really injecting, and you're doing things to make more money, and you are selling products and not reporting it to pay state sales tax, or you're charging state sales tax, but you're underreporting it. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. However, I call it a get out of jail free card or political amnesty. I have seen where patients have not charged tax for taxable product and not paid sales tax on it, yet they have a state sales use certificate and they really should be. And I say, look, you may get amnesty from the state, but you've got to put a marking point. You got to set the tone. And here's the most important thing, Mara, that you said about monkey see, monkey do. The moment you do something wrong and somebody wants to follow your lead, even whether it's ethics, legality, or morality, my perception of what an employee is going to say you as a business owner, so what are you going to do about it?
Mhm.
This is what I've got on you. It's the old expressions that, man, this guy's got pictures on this person somewhere, in this deep hidden secret. So, you got to be very, very careful about what you do in writing prescriptions in somebody else's name. For those of you who are insured practices, Do not write the prescription in your husband's, your wife's, your child's name. Do not write the prescription in a different date because they're going to be covered under health insurance next month. Come back next month. All right. Stealing cash, as you said, somebody sees you stealing cash and not reporting it. You have to have all these different systems in place, security cameras. Are you going to prosecute the offender? I try to stay away from prosecution because in some of the local rag newspapers, I call them, in these local communities that's read by every gossiper in town, you don't want your name being that practice that is associated with crime and theft because patients may not want to come to you for something that you had no innocent control over.
And worse yet, Jay, you date yourself when you talk about the rag newspaper. Let's think about if it appears online.
Oh.
And nothing goes away online. If it was online, it stays online, and you don't want that issue being what shows up in a Google search for your name.
Yeah, appearing in the newspaper only stays around as long as I take the paper to put it in the bottom of my parrot's cages, and then that gets thrown away the next day. And insurance fraud.
Yes.
A big one for those of you who do recon and take insurance. When you are upcharging or you are doing updoing of the CPT code and you really didn't do that procedure, insurance fraud, that's just not the way to go.
So now that we have thoroughly scared everybody and prepared them all at the same time, I think that one thing we know is, again, it can happen in any practice, that there is a way to prevent as much as possible. And that's where we want to make sure we're putting as many of these security systems into place. I mean, the literal security system and the proverbial security system. So, Jay, thank you so much for sharing this knowledge. You have decades of stories and knowledge and anecdotes and solutions that you bring. So I am so glad you were able to take the time, because I know you have even more recordings to do after this because it's still virtual conference season. But thank you so much for sharing all of this today.
Putting these in place, Mara, are Shorr Solutions.
I love it. If anybody, as you're listening to this podcast, whether you listen to this podcast when it first comes out, or you listen to this podcast episode, even if it's a year from now, if you have questions about any of the things we talked about today, if you have experienced this, if you're going through it right now, and quite honestly, you need help, that's what we're here for. So in addition to having the podcast, we have Shorr Solutions, the consulting company, and we would absolutely welcome the opportunity to help your practice as well. So that's if you think that Jay knows a thing or two, just getting started. So Jay, thank you again. And I can't wait to record another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast, with you.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you for listening to another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast.